I finally got it. I know what the Warden is. This is a huge breakthrough in Minecraft lore. Well, what is it? It's an axolotl. It's a what? It's an axolotl. I'm telling you, in the Minecraft launcher, there was a secret message that says the axolotls are not what they seem. Okay, but that doesn't mean that they're wardens. But get this, if you invert the colors of the warden, you get an axolotl. Okay, come on, that's a bit of a stretch. But the colors, it's not an axolotl. But the colors are pink. Don't forget the colors. Hello Internet, welcome to Wifies, the show that keeps its viewers in the deep dark about everything. With the new insane Minecraft 1.19 update and the developers outright confirming that there is intentional lore to be found, it's no surprise that Warden theories have been springing up left, right, and center. But what actually is this thing? So stick around as there is a lot, and I mean a lot to cover, because today we're going to answer once and for all, what is the Warden, the ancient city, and how do they fit into the entire story of Minecraft? It doesn't take more than a glance to notice that there is so much to unpack here. This update is full of information waiting to be deciphered, so where do we even start? Well, let's take a look at the cities themselves. The cities offer a ton of subtle and not so subtle clues that help us piece together a picture of what went on here. The first thing to note is the material of the floor. All the pathways in the ancient cities are layered with wool. To the regular observer, this may seem like a random cushioning block, but it actually isn't that simple. Wool is a very important block when it comes to Sculk because it can block noise vibrations. Typically, Sculk sensors can pick up sound vibrations and transmit the signal to nearby Sculk shrieker blocks, which can in turn alert and summon the Warden. However, wool blocks can block sound vibrations from reaching the Sculk shrieker, and quoting the Minecraft wiki, Sculk sensors are not able to detect footsteps on wool. And this little detail is super important to help us uncover the relationship between the Warden and the ancient builders. Also, if it wasn't clear already, I'm going to assume that the ancient builders, the race of people before Steve, were the ones living in these cities, not a race of wardens or something. And if you want to argue that the Illagers built this, well, I'll address that in a little bit, so bear with me. Another important detail comes in the form of chest loot. There are tons of chests scattered all around the ancient city, and the items inside them are more revealing than you might expect, specifically snowballs. Again, this seems completely random, but it's not. In the preview for the Wild update back in 2020, we see the Mojang team using snowballs to distract the Warden. This is because the snowballs hitting the walls also emit sound vibrations that the Warden can pick up and get distracted by. So the fact that there are snowballs and books of Swift Sneak in these chests, coupled with the fact that the floors are made of wool, tells us something very important. The Warden and the ancient builders were not friends. This piece of information is invaluable. The snowballs and wool floors are tools to stay away from the Warden, to protect the inhabitants of these cities from it. Whatever the Warden is, the ancient race of builders were scared of it, or at least they knew not to mess with it. Otherwise, why would they have all these tools to avoid it? But this begs the question, if they did fear the Warden, why did they stay? Nothing is forcing the builders to remain in these cities. If the Warden was such a big problem, why didn't they just leave and build the city somewhere else? This brings us to another very crucial point. The where. The where, or location of the ancient cities, answers one of the most interesting and important questions about the lore. Is the Sculk man-made? And I'm here to tell you, it's not. Probably. To figure this out, we just have to consider this simple observation. Every single ancient city is in a deep dark, but not every deep dark has an ancient city. Take a look at this isolated patch of Sculk that's over 500 blocks away from the nearest city, or this absolutely massive pile of Sculk over 250 blocks away. And on the other hand, I dare you to try to find an ancient city that isn't in a deep dark. Every single one will at least be partially covered in Sculk. So what does that mean? It means that these cities were constructed in the deep dark on purpose. The ancient builders who built the cities wanted to live there. They wanted to be around the Sculk for some reason. Now it could just be that the builders settled there because no mobs can spawn in the deep dark. And while that certainly might be part of it, I don't think it's the full truth. The builders knew what they were getting into. They wanted to use the Sculk to their advantage. And we know that this is definitely true for other reasons as well. The loot chests in the ancient cities are filled with Sculk sensors, shriekers, bodies, catalysts, and straight up skulk. It's not like the skulk is a disease that later corrupted the cities, it was an integrated part of the builder's lifestyle. Look no further than the pillars in front of the statue. These pillars don't look like anything special at first, but take a peek inside and you find a waterlogged skulk sensor responsible for turning on the lights. The builders were using the skulk to their advantage. Same thing in the redstone lab underneath the statue that has a piston door powered by skulk. Also, side note, I have no idea why these things are waterlogged. The only use of a waterlogged skulk sensor is to keep it silent, so it's probably just for aesthetics, but you'll have to ask the ancient builders. That means that skulk blocks are all natural to an extent. A lot of you may argue that the skulk sensor isn't natural, and I would like to agree, but I just can't. It appears in the redstone section of the inventory, it gives off redstone particles, and hell, it's even a redstone component. No way it's natural, right? Well, it spawns naturally. It can appear in completely isolated veins of skulk with no human interference. It can spawn as a result of the catalyst absorbing souls. Even a skulk shrieker, which in my opinion is the most man-made out of the three, can spawn completely on its own in veins of skulk. None of these three blocks are man-made, they can all spawn completely by themselves, and calling these three blocks unnatural just because they're redstone components isn't too fair. In real life, electric signals are parallel of redstone occurs in nature all the time, through lightning, the spin of the Earth's core, and even in our bodies through neurons. It doesn't have to be man-made to make redstone power, it can be alive. This is showcased perfectly in the charge that pulses through skulk when something dies on it. The soul energy or charge is literally providing electric or redstone charge, similar to how neurons in the brain use electric signals to communicate. But okay, if you're still with me, we established that the ancient builders constructed these cities among naturally spawning veins of skulk in the deep dark biomes. But why did they do it? Why did they willingly set up camp next to such a dangerous mob? Well, it's because they needed it. But before I cover the Warden, I want to address one more point that I know you're probably thinking about: the pillagers. Ever since the ancient city overhaul in snapshot 22W13A, something has caught the eye of every theorist out there: the traces of pillager-like structures scattered throughout the cities. You've got ruins that resemble pillager outposts, scaffolding and bridges made of dark oak, and even these little areas with wool exactly mirroring the wool rooms in woodland mansions. I've seen many people look at this and conclude that the illagers must have built the cities, that they were responsible for the creation of the Warden, but I don't think that's the case at all. Look at the names of the structures that resemble pillager design. These wool sites are literally called camps, and the pillager outposts don't even have a distinct name in the files. Notice how the outposts also don't look like an integrated part of the city. Not only is the material obviously different, but it seems like these structures were built around or on the pre-existing ruins. The dark oak scaffolding doesn't actually make up anything new, it's just bridges used to connect the already existing crumbling ruins, making them easier to traverse. The blue-colored carpets are nowhere near abundant and seem like the pillagers were following the pre-existing example and adding carpets where they explored. And look at how the only places you find the structures and camps are on the outskirts of the town. Granted, this could be a coincidence across the few cities I've checked, but it certainly adds to the argument if it's true. It seems like the pillager society arrived on the site of the already abandoned ancient city and explored it, crossing the gaps with dark oak bridges and erecting small structures wherever they saw fit. There's two distinct civilizations here. One planning to live here for a long time, constructing saunas and ice boxes out of deep slate, and another building campsites and outposts out of dark oak. But without further ado, the Warden. The Warden is undoubtedly the highlight of this update and the final piece of the puzzle. Its otherworldly appearance is something never before seen in Minecraft, and it's the first time the devs have outright declared there was lore in the game. Those things in its chest were confirmed to be souls by developer Brandon Pierce, or King B-Dogs, who stated they were extremely important to the Warden's disturbing and unsettling lore. But the Warden wasn't always called the Warden. In the early stages of its development, this beast used to be called the Hollowed, and and the skulk the hollow. Taking a look at the Warden's early concept art reveals many different ideas and a few continuities throughout all the iterations. Sometimes the Warden resembles an axolotl, other times a villager, a wither, a respawn anchor, but two things are always consistent. The first is the core. Across almost every design of the Warden, there is a centerpiece in its chest, a core that has to have some significance. The second consistency is the Warden always parallels the hollow, or the skulk. Referencing its early name, it is hollowed by the hollow. If the skulk is trypophobia looking, so is the Warden. If the skulk is otherworldly and green, so is the Warden. It follows the same color palette because they're made of the same stuff, which by the way is skulk and bones. For anyone who thought this was endstone, it's not. All the yellow and gray textures were confirmed to be bones by King B-Dogs. Even the way the Warden walks confirms this. It walks hunched over and sways back and forth in multiple directions. It seems like it's a loose composition of bones held together by the skulk and some quote-unquote soul power in the center. It's my belief that whenever the Warden is summoned, the skulk pulls together a bunch of bones and souls and constructs a new Warden out of the ground. The Shrieker, as evidenced by its design containing swirling souls, is a soul hub, or a reserve that provides the power for the Warden construction. And this isn't just speculation. The way that skulk spreads is through death. If any mob dies within an 8-block radius of the skulk catalyst, its death energy will be converted to charge, which in turn spreads the skulk growth and has a chance of generating a Shrieker or a Sensor. Shriekers are much less likely to generate because they need a much stronger concentration of souls. They're the ones storing it for the Warden construction. The Warden is an amalgamation of souls swirling angrily inside a vessel of bones and skulk. That's why it isn't classified as a mob or a boss. You don't need to kill it to get the Monster Hunter achievement, and the devs encourage you not to kill it. They claim it's a force of nature that shouldn't be messed with. That's why it doesn't drop anything worthwhile, because it shouldn't be killed. But why? Why are the ancient builders actively setting up in an area haunted by such a danger? Because it's protecting them. What if the Warden was a guardian from something even worse? Something up above on the surface that terrorized the builders enough to go hide down below? What if the Warden was made to protect the builders from the Wither? Several more details scattered throughout the city make this argument way more convincing. The first is this infamous statue in the center of certain structures. This statue actually has its own file name and it's called Small Portal Statue. A lot of people saw this and immediately jumped to the idea that it was a replica of the city center statue, meaning it's all a portal to a new dimension. But I don't actually think that's the case. You know what else both of these statues resemble? The Warden. The resemblance maybe isn't striking at first, but if you take a look at the old concept art for both the Warden and the ancient city, it's pretty obvious that these two structures are not portals, but statues of the Warden's head. And if you want further proof, the statue was even renamed to small_statue. They took out the word portal. Now maybe this video will age terribly when a new dimension gets announced, but hopefully that's not the case. And these statues aren't the only place we find tributes to the Warden. The triangular shapes in the center of the barracks and small posts dotted around the cities resemble shrines. They're covered in candles which further add to this ritual and spiritual feel. The ancient builders are worshipping the Warden, but the final piece of information that sealed the deal for me is the mechanism of the Skulk Shrieker. The Shrieker activates when a Skulk sensor passes on a vibration to it, but the catch is that the vibration has to come from a player. A Skulk Shrieker won't summon the Warden unless a player activates the sensor. At first, I thought this meant that the Shriekers were anti-player, and that some other race created it as a defense against the builders. But instead of thinking about it like anti-player, how about thinking along the lines of player activated? The builders don't want an accidental mob noise or chest opening to trip their sensors and summon the Warden for no reason. No, they want to make sure that when they need to summon the Warden for protection, they can do it intentionally through the Shriekers. So what am I getting at? The ancient builders, tormented by their accidental creation of the Wither, were forced to flee underground and escape. Some civilizations ran off and constructed strongholds looking to escape to the end dimension, but others went deeper. They mined to the deepest depths of the world where they knew to find skulk patches, the weird alien-like growth only generated at the lowest Y levels possible. They set up camp near the skulk, knowing of its properties in containing souls and harnessing death. They constructed cities around it, strongholds made out of the toughest material around them. They stored food in ice boxes and built saunas and barracks, knowing they'll have to be here for a long time. They constructed a redstone laboratory, testing the powers of the skulk and using it in their builds, as lamps and as doorways. But finally, inevitably, a wither broke through from the surface. The builders panicked, running around in fear when suddenly one activated a shrieker, and out of the ground came a warden. An amalgamation of the souls and bones of the builders who had died in the city, attacking anything that made a sound. A force of nature strong enough to take out even the wither. The builders rejoiced, careful not to anger the warden but thankful for its defense. Many more withers roamed the surface, but for now the builders had won a battle. But then, the rituals began. They had to keep the warden happy, right? They can't risk angering it. By force or by choice, builders were sacrificed to the skulk. They were killed by their comrades near the skulk catalyst to spread the growth. The soul-infused skulk slowly consumed the entire city, fueled by the sacrifices in hopes to keep the warden happy and strong. The other builders erected shrines and monuments in honor of the wardens and their sacrificed allies. They laced their pathways and castles with a carpet to avoid purposely summoning the beast. The angry souls of the sacrificed builders coursed through the skulk growth, and when the alarm was tripped, the shrieker sent out a signal, and all the vengeful souls of the builders and their bones were pooled together in the creation of something inhuman. Its tortured spirits attacked anything that makes noise, and in this case, it's just what the builders needed. The sacrifices continued, each time a new set of builders was offered up as tribute to the warden, compensation for protection, hoping to fuel its strength and please it. But slowly the population ran dry. With each wither attack came more and more damage to the city and less builders to sacrifice. Eventually the final builder was sacrificed to the warden, hoping to please it one last time as its soul joins the angry, swirling mass in the shrieker. The final builder walks the city alone, maybe in regret that he's had to sacrifice all his allies to make it to this point. The final warden to be summoned is the product of a whole population offered as sacrifice, a collection of souls that seeks revenge, whether it be on the wither or their allies who sent them to die. And as the shrieker gets activated one more time, the city finds peace at last. And maybe the skulk is man-made. Maybe they engineered it to function the way that it does. It certainly explains the human priming and the fact that it can be redstone activated. But the core of the lore still stands regardless. By definition, the warden is a mob that looks over and supervises a certain area, which is exactly what the warden is doing to the ancient city. And the idea of a civilization slowly sacrificing their members, custom of the sea style, in tribute to skulk overlords, which their vengeful souls then combine to form the warden, sounds pretty disturbing to me. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing, it really helps out a ton. And as always, peace out, have a good one. I'll see you next time.